In this video, we'll discuss net present value, which is the most widely used capital budgeting technique. As the name suggests, we'll look at all the expected cash flows from a project. We'll discount those back to today's dollars, and from this we can determine how much value we expect the project to add for the firm. Based on comparing projects in this way, we'll make the best decision as a firm for what project to take on.
Net present value is a capital budgeting technique that is consistent with the goal of maximizing shareholder wealth. And we know, based on the principal-agent relationship, that should be the goal of the manager, to maximize long-term shareholder wealth. What we try to do with NPV, we look at the benefits and the costs of potential projects. We compare those, we do that in present value terms, and we see if we took this project on today, would the company be better off or worse off? So as the name suggests, present value, we're finding in today's dollars what is the difference between the present value of the expected future cash flows provided by the project and the initial cost of the project. Accepting a positive NPV project leads to an increase in shareholder wealth as the company becomes more valuable. If you accept a negative NPV project, that's going to make the company worth less and makes shareholder wealth decline as the stock price decreases. What we're trying to do is predict the value of these projects. They have a good value that will add wealth to the company. If they do, we want to accept those and reap the benefits. So we can take a 5-step approach to compute NPV. Number 1, determine the cost of the project. So you're going to have to build a building, do some research, train employees, anything that has to happen before the project can start. So you need to add all that up. That's your starting cost. That's going to be your cash flow in year 0, and that's going to be negative. Next, you need to estimate the cash flows over the project's forecasted life. This project's going to go on for some number of years. Each year you need to estimate the cash inflows, money that will be earned by the company as a result of taking on the project, but also cash outflows, ongoing costs you'll face each year as a result of the project. But what you're after each year is this estimate of a net cash flow. When we look at the cash inflows, we subtract away the cash outflows, the expenses. How much money is this project going to provide each year? And one thing you never want to forget is the salvage value. So maybe you have this project, you're running a small factory, but in 7 years the project's done. You don't plan to go forward with it in any way. You don't plan to use the building or the equipment, so there you have to figure out your salvage value. You're going to go ahead and sell that building and sell that machinery in the project's terminal year. Then you need to determine the riskiness of the project and estimate the cost of capital. The cost of capital is the discount rate used in determining the present value of the future cash flows. So far we've just estimated these cash flows, and they'll be received at different points in time. But if we want to really make a comparison and come up with a value, we need to think about all those cash flows at a common time. And the time we'll use is time 0. So it's very important to figure out the correct cost of capital. In cost of capital, discount rate, these things are used interchangeably. But what we're after here is the riskiness of the investment. If you had something that was equally risky, another project, what rate of return would you require on that project? When you figure that out, you figured out your discount rate or your cost of capital, and that'll be used to discount all those cash flows. And as you'd expect, the riskier the project, the higher the cost of capital for the project. You can have a bad project, a project that is without a doubt a loser for the firm, but if you assign a cost of capital that is too low because you underestimate the risk of that project, you're going to make it look like a really nice project, and that's going to lead to you accepting a bad project. Now that you have all your cash flows and you have your cost of capital, you can go ahead and calculate NPV. You set out all those cash flows, take the present value of each cash flow, add everything together, and see what that final number looks like. Or a 2-part way of thinking about it is add up everything that happens after year 0. Those things all result from making that investment, and compare it to the investment. So what's the total present value of all your cash flows in year 1, 2, 3, 4 until the terminal year? Take that, deduct the cost of the project and see if you have a positive or negative number. If you have a positive number, that project is going to add value to the firm. If you have a negative number, that project is going to be costly to the firm. So you wouldn't want to take that on. That would decrease shareholder wealth. So that's the last point here. Make a decision. You're going to accept the projects with positive net present value and reject the projects with negative net present value. Now, one thing you want to be slightly careful about, in practice, a company is not going to be able to accept all positive NPV projects. And that's because companies have limited amounts of capital. So you're going to have to make decisions within the good projects, and you're going to want to pick the projects such that you have the largest possible increase in shareholder wealth. A couple of bewares. Beware of optimistic estimates of future cash flows. If you're going to make a mistake estimating future cash flows, err on the side of caution. If you can't decide if that project is going to provide you with $10,000 or $12,000 next month, run it with 10 and see what that looks like. The most difficult thing when you're making NPV calculations, or in the later videos, payback period calculations or internal rate of return calculations, the hardest thing is figuring out those expected cash flows and trying to estimate those correctly. If those aren't estimated correctly, then you may make bad decisions. You're never going to be perfect, but put some work in and make it realistic. Never make things look better than you really think they are to get a product launched. NPV is the best method for making capital investment decisions. We'll talk about the payback period. We'll talk about internal rate of return. Those have some positive aspects. But the most accepted, what's considered the best, is the net present value method. Make sure to take a look at this exhibit 10.2. It lays out very nicely the calculations you'll make. In year 0, you have that initial negative cash flow. So that'll be your net cash flow in year 0. And in each other year, you need to calculate the cash inflows and cash outflows expected. Those differences each year will give you your net cash flows. And in the last year, don't forget the salvage value. That can make or break a project. And there are a couple additional examples you can look at. Exhibit 10.3 and Exhibit 10.4. And we're going to go ahead and go through one more example. So we're going to make our timeline. Year 0, 1, 2, 3, and we'll make this a 4-year project. We'll have an initial cash flow, and then each year we'll have cash inflow, cash outflow. This project requires an investment of $10,000 in year 1. So what we're going to try to determine, is this a good or a bad project? Cash inflow in the first year is $2,000. Second year, $3,000. Third year, good year, $5,000. And $6,000 in the fourth year. Cash outflows, those are going to be consistent. $500 a year. But we forgot one thing here. What we forgot is the terminal value. Say that's $2,000 more that you get back. So we have all our cash flows set out each year. So now we need to look at the net cash flows so we can discount those. Net cash flow here. Actually, we'll just sum these up. So those are the net cash flows. Now we need to figure out what is our discount rate. And we'll say our discount rate is 11%. So now we're comparing this project to a project based on its level of riskiness. We would expect to earn 11% per year in returns. So our discounted cash flows, we don't need to discount this cash flow in year 0 because we're discounting back to year 0. But here we'll discount $1,500, and we'll do that one time at this 11%. Same thing here. We'll discount this once But now we have to make sure here, the mistake I just made, I want to discount this twice, and this 3 times, and this 4 times. So now to find the NPV, we just add all those together. And we have a very nice NPV of about $1,600. So we would accept that project. Now we talked a little about maybe you have many projects you could accept, but if we look at this one, and this is our only project, we like it. We'd be equally happy with a value increase for the firm of $1,611 today as we would taking on this project. But I want to show you one thing about this discount rate. Let's say that we change this because we decided this project's really more risky than we expected. Much more risky. So we make this 17%. Now this project's a loser. We can't accept the project because it has a negative NPV. What has changed about all this work we see here? The only thing that's changed is the estimation of how risky this project is. So it shows how important it is to get your discount rate right. If you get your discount rate wrong, you might be accepting projects when you should reject the projects. So that's something in practice you have to be very careful of. Estimating cash flows is always difficult, but don't forget to give some good attention to your discount rate to make sure you're making a proper comparison to a similar project with a similar risk level. To summarize this video, I just touched on a couple of the main points. Be very careful with your discount rate and estimating your cash flows. Spend the time necessary to get those things right. And as far as what we're doing here, think about it from a manager's perspective who's trying to maximize shareholder wealth. We have to find projects that will lead to increases in firm value. And this net present value gives us a way to evaluate projects and determine if we should expect these projects to add to or take away from that shareholder wealth. There's a good step-by-step in this chapter, so get some practice working these problems, and most importantly, just make sure you understand what we're after here. We're after choosing those projects that will increase shareholder wealth and avoiding those which will decrease shareholder wealth.